First off, welcome to NETIV Thursday morning class. And as you can tell, I'm not Rod. He has laryngitis, and rather than sign his lesson, he asked me to fill in. And if you're listening to this recording on YouTube, we hope that you enjoy it and choose to hit the like button and join us regularly on Thursday mornings. Now, before I share what I learned this week, I want to express my sorrow to the two families, Yaron Lishkin and Sarah Milgram. Yaron, who's a research assistant in Israel at the State Department for Israel, and Sarah, his fiance, who organizes visits and missions to Israel. They were shot and killed last night, leaving a Jewish event in D.C. at the museum, and it was a senseless killing. But again, anti-Semitism has no special place in my heart. My talk comes from the book of Leviticus, and I want to talk about the 26th chapter. And there is so much in there that I can't read it all, but I'm going to pick spots and basically give you an understanding of what I understand from that 26th chapter. Now, our story today begins with God promising that if the people of Israel will keep his commandments, they will enjoy material prosperity and dwell securely in their homeland, which obviously didn't happen. But he also delivers a harsh rebuke, a warning of exile and persecution and other evils that will befall them if they abandon their covenant with him. Now, this chapter really is about having a true relationship with God. Nevertheless, it says in that 26th chapter, even when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor will I ever abhor them, to destroy them or to break my covenant with them, for I am their Lord, their God. So I want to focus on this 26th. Mishtim, or the super rational ones are called hukim, which are decrees. Now, the mishpatim are those laws that of the 10 commandments or the 7 laws. They're the easy ones to understand. They're direct. They tell you and they explain it easily. Now, they're understood and there's no explanation needed. But when we deal with subjects like murder, you understand what murder is and you understand what stealing is. Now, man would have instituted these laws without God. Well, without God to say, they're just necessary laws. Mishpatim, or mitzvot, commandments, also include things like charity. But the second category is called hukim. Now, these are mitzvot such as dietary laws or the laws of family purity, or the idea we shouldn't mix woolen and linen, or dealing with the ashes of the red heifer. In part, many of them are incomprehensible. They're just things that they were asked to do. Some are even irrational. Now, there's also a third category, I guess, that I should mention, and that's called edot, which are testimonials, which occupy ground between decrees and laws. And a testimonial is a mitzvot that commemorates or represents something. It's the commandments like putting on the tefillim, or to rest on the Sabbath, or to eat matzah on Passover. These are the laws which would not have been devised on our own, certainly not the way the Torah commands, but nevertheless, they are rational acts. And once their significance is explained to us, we can appreciate their import and their utility. Now, each of these terms, mishpatim, hukim, and edot, are also used by the Torah as a synonym for just simply mitzvot. And their reference is to all the commandments of the Torah. Now, a case in point is the Torah section called Mishpatim, which is Exodus 21 to 24, which opens with God's word or words to Moses. And these are the Mishpatim that you shall set before them. Now, 53 mitzvot are listed there. Primarily, they're logical laws, but there's also a few testimonials, edot, and at least one irrational law. Now, it's the last mitzvah in that series, which is a prohibition against mixing meat with milk, where it says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. There's no explanation, but it is something to be understood. So let me start over again. If you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments and perform them, then I will. Now, I could read all the blessings, but I would have to stop here and focus on just simply the word decrees. But I need to keep going. So they obviously are not mitzvot commandments because Moses mentions them in the next text. This chapter focuses on ideal blessings that will occur because the people are worthy of God's esteem. We read about them in the first 13 verses of this chapter. The blessings are really generalizations. They're not specifics. In 26:14, we notice or we witness what is often referred to as the punishments or the curses, the admonitions placed on the Israelites for failing to meet his standards. Now, the commentaries or the commentators referred to these as admonitions. These admonitions are found over the next 29 verses. But I want to stop for a second. I want you to look at 26:14 to 16. If you will not listen to me and will not perform all of these mitzvot or commandments, if you consider my hukim or decrees loathsome, and if your being rejects my edot, my ordinances, so as not to perform all my commandments, so that you may annul my covenant, then I will do the same to you. So he's warning them of what the repercussions are for not completing the covenant as they had already established. Now, we are told that there are going to be 49 curses or admonitions that are going to be found in this parsha. Does the number 49 ring a bell with you? We're in the middle of the counting of the Omer, which is a 49-day period of focusing on at least one emotional or behavioral understanding each and every day. Now, later in the parsha called Kitova or Kitavo, we deal with 98 admonitions or 2 times 49. Now, these curses are about life's choices. They are personal, but in a society that picks and chooses, they become a national problem. God's mercy prevents all of these curses from befalling the Israelites at any one time. And if we look at least the last 150, 125 years, we can see that there are intervals before and during and in which these catastrophes occur. Obviously, these admonitions will not last forever. As we learn in verse 42, it says, and I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. Now it was Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, who reminded us that the original covenant with the people that occurred at Mount Sinai with the revelation of the 10 Commandments, Moses learned more than those 10 statements during that 40-day period on the stay on the mountain. We learned that in Exodus 24, chapter 24, verses 4 and 7, that these teachings were recorded into what's called the Book of the Covenant. Now, the people ratified that covenant in an offering that they made to God. Now, that story of that covenant is found in 24, 5 to 8. Now, the problem was that the people broke the covenant by making and worshiping a golden calf. Not all of them, but enough of them that Moses began to break the first 2 tablets. Now, after a 40-day period of prayer and supplication, Moses was allowed to return to the mountain, and he received a second set of tablets. They were similar, but not the same. But the understanding is Moses was taught the Torah, and it was necessary when he came down from for the people to ratify this new covenant that was called the Moabic covenant. Now, there was no offering this time, but a stringent set of warnings were given that are found here in this chapter. It's perfectly clear that Israel's prosperity and their survival depended on their loyalty to God and his covenant. So our chapter begins with blessings, taking the first 12 verses, while the curses and admonitions take 29 verses. That does not mean there are more punishments than there are blessings. The punishments are very specific. The blessings are, well, they're couched in generality. So there's more to it than what we see. So I'm not sure you noticed this, but the commentators wondered why only physical blessings like prosperity and military victories are dealt with here among the blessings. What about the spiritual rewards that await those who serve God and keep the Torah? Well, the commentators say there's 3 points to this whole thing. There was one spiritual promise found in the text, and that was in 26:11, as God promised to place his sanctuary among them, and his spirit would not reject them. The righteous will enjoy the nearness of God. That was the first one. That came with the building of the tabernacle. Now, both the blessings and the curses were not seen as hidden miracles. They saw no reason for the Torah dealing with spiritual rewards, as one who naturally and faithfully serves God would wonder about such a thing. Rambam taught the Torah's intention, therefore, is to teach that obedience to God is of such a magnitude that it will be rewarded miraculously. Now, the third point that they come up with is material blessings are hardly the primary reason, nor the material deprivation the primary punishment. The only punishment comes in the world to come or in Gehinnom. That can be the adequate reward or punishment. Now, God promises here that those who serve him with sincerity and joy will be granted all the blessings of this world, so he can increase his service and earn even greater rewards. Now, to those who are what we would call evildoers or rebellious, they will be punished. And their punishment may come in the form of deprivation in this world, so that it will be difficult for them to perform the commandments and earn the share in the world to come. This will serve as a double punishment, according to the Ramban. The admonitions, well, they were not meant to be revenge, but as a way of influencing people to repent. Now, this is the reason they are inflicted in what appears to be the rest of this chapter, dealing with the 5 stages that involve admonition. Take a look at 26:18. Notice 7 ways for your sins. Now look at verse 21, 23, and 28. Notice they believed in the number 7, and it was literal for them. Each level was composed of 7 components and was punished at each level, called measure for measure. Now, Rashi would then explain how on each level, 7 sins were followed by 7 distinct punishments. Now, it's easy to follow on the first level, but it requires much more talent than I have to do the same thing on the rest of them, because they get much, much deeper. Rashbam and Ibn Ezra saw the idea of the 7 not as a literal 7, but as a way of indicating many sins and punishments. Rabbi Shimshon Hirsch said that the number 7 was a way of showing completeness, as it speaks of time. Now, as you go through and going back to 26:14, it says, "But if you do not listen to me, I will not perform all these commandments." So here he really is speaking about studying Torah intensely, which is what you folks are about. You want to learn the Torah. Or if someone fails to learn or to do a mitzvah, This idea goes back all the way to the blessings in the third verse, dealing with the virtue of learning Torah. Failure to learn comes from the oral teachings of the sages, designed to fill in the gaps in the written Torah. The oral Torah was not committed to writing until centuries later. Today, this oral understanding is controversial when it comes to studying the Talmud or the Zohar. Originally, it was not to be shared with the Gentiles, but beginning in the days of the Arizal and the Bel Shem Tov, as they saw the end of days drawing near, they said that the teaching of the Gentiles was important and their understanding needed to happen. Okay, let's look at 26, 14, and 15. Look at the chain reaction of sin. And here we find our 7 steps, each leading to the next, which is a downward spiral. In 14, he begins by saying, you will not dedicate yourselves to Torah study. Those are those who are on the way down. Eventually stop performing the commandments. So you quit reading, then you quit doing. In verse 20 or 26:15, he goes on to say, be revolted in some sense by those who truly study Torah. Hate the sages who expound on the ordinances. Prevent others from being observant, such as family comes to mind. Deny that God gave the commandments. Deny that there is even an existence of God. Each one takes you further and further away from God. So this really is the only place where we actually find the 7 explicitly listed. And here transgressions is based on Israel's apathetic or negative attitude, which led to a greater and greater expression of wrath. But we can see the same things in the Gentiles. Originally, when we came across on the Mayflower, one of the things that we saw was the fact that many of them came over for religious freedom, a closeness to God. But the longer we've been here, the more we find many people following these 7 paths away from God. Now, the first series of punishments begins in 26:16, causing eyes to long and souls to suffer. Rashi would note that this will cause us to suffer as well. On a second level in 18, where it tells us that the punishments will be measure for measure. Breaking, there might be the idea of an iron or a copper dome regarding the temple. You know, it speaks of the temple no longer having the power to bring well-being to the land. Now, remember, they took the tabernacle and they packed it away. And so when the temple was functioning, that was the source. But according to the writers, there was an iron dome which tended to, well, it caused sweat, which would speak of dew, while the copper dome would be one that didn't have dew. There was nothing there. It would see drought. Now, on the third level, it's called casually or kari, referring to heed his Torah. Here it's about haphazard or erratic behavior. A person treats the commandments as a menu of choices, choosing which ones to follow. Now, Onkelos, who was a Roman, he talked about this and he spoke about the stubbornness in terms of drawing close to God. Many people chose not to draw close to God, but they began to follow some of the commandments and they built their laws in their countries based on that. Now, the fourth level again uses the word kari, which means casual, but here it speaks more emphatically about casualness. The casual reader sees the punishments as a random acts, mere coincidences, and it becomes more difficult to perceive God's hand in the punishments. Here, random thinking leads to food shortages or shortages of cooking materials, which in that day would have been wood. And it would have involved, in many cases, invaders or victories by one's enemies over their soldiers. Now, the final level was again involving the word kari, but here it is the fury of casualness. It regarded in the first instance the suffering was mitigated by knowing God was directing this. Well, in the second instance, one could have found good times mixed with bad. But now here they are combined, and good is obscured in God's plan as he withdraws himself. His direct involvement in the nation's fate is now gone. Here the punishment hints that the temple times that the people have lost their shield and the people have given into cannibalism as they starve inside their very own walls. Now, finally, the Jewish people would find themselves scattered among the nations. And why? Well, the land was to be appeased, Shemitah. Now, in the Babylonian exile, the land received its rest, and God, rather than destroying the people, took it out on his displeasure out on the land itself. Even when they were allowed to return, we find that not all of the Israelites chose to come home. And those that did would later be sent away again by a second diaspora, which would be even greater by the Romans. Now, I want you to look at 26:40 to 43, and you'll notice in there, they will confess their sins and the sins of their fathers that got them to this point. But even so, God is going to remain cool to them. Why? Most agree that the response was half-hearted on their part. Hafetz Haim, a recent rabbi, thought that the focus was only on the past and did not speak to their actions in the future, because those did not change. It appears he will temper his judgments. Well, he will provide some compassion. In 26:42, we read, "And I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and also with my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember, and I will remember the land." What is unusual here is the spelling of Jacob's name. Now, if you could read the Hebrew, you would find out that in his name, there was an extra vav placed in his name. Now, at the same time, conversely, Elijah, whose real name would have been Eliyahu back then, the prophet will find that the vav is missing from his name. It's missing from his name 5 times and is added to Jacob's name 5 times. So Rashi saw in the Midrash that Jacob would return the missing vavs to Elijah after he hailed or heralded the coming of the Messiah. So we have something to look forward to. Now look at 26:44. Despite all this, while they're in the land of their enemies, I will not despise them, nor will I reject them to annihilate them, but rather breaking my covenant that is with them, for I am the Lord their God. Now we begin to see that God, though invisible, is still active in their lives as he attempts to comfort them. Now, it's interesting to note that whenever or wherever they go in the diaspora, this exile, they manage to, with a few righteous men, reestablish houses of worship and groups for Torah study. That is a tremendous accomplishment. But in most cases, the great start will give way to the attempts to assimilate with the people that are there. Create many bright men will attempt to make a name for themselves as a host, but not for God. But soon the hosts purge the God believers, and they see that they begin the process in a new place. They move. But what is the place behind, or what is left behind, causes the host to move towards God because they see something there, but they're not sure what. Now, finally, in 26:46, these are the decrees, the ordinances, and the laws that the Lord gave between himself and the children of Israel on the Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses. Again, the word laws is in plural. And it doesn't mean just the written laws. It's to include those oral ones also. Okay. Are you tired of me yet? I finished looking at chapter 26 in a hurry. So you've got, if you go back and listen to the tape, you'll also have a writing on the side so that you'll be able to read my words, stop the tape. Notice I'm using the old language that you can stop a tape. There is no tape. You get to, anyway, back to the story. You can stop and pick through the words because chapter 26 is full. It's very difficult just to read it on the surface. My son is a true Christian. In fact, he's even ministering. So there are times when he and I not buck heads, but we discuss points and we find differences. But again, it's more difficult when I point to the Hebrew Bible because it's far different than the King James or the NIV or any of the others. There are nuances that are there. But anyway, take time to read it for yourself as you go through it. The good news is the Jewish people go through this chapter every year. And each year you add to what you know and you begin to go deeper and deeper and deeper.